At his multi-million-dollar wedding, the bride called their crying twins a nuisance. When a hotel maid calmed them in seconds, the groom did the unthinkable. He canceled everything. But he never knew his bride's brutal plan for revenge started with a spy already inside his home. Welcome to our channel. Before we dive into this wild story of betrayal and revenge, let us know where you're watching from and what time it is in the comments below. And don't forget to like this video and subscribe so you don't miss what happens next. The air in the Astor Grand Ballroom was thick with the scent of 1,000 white orchids and old money. Sunlight, filtered through the towering arched windows, glinted off crystal chandeliers, casting a diamond-like shimmer over the 200 guests. At the end of the aisle, standing beneath an archway dripping with lilies, was Julian Vance. To the world, he was a titan, a real estate tycoon who reshaped the Chicago skyline with steel and glass. But at this moment, in his perfectly tailored Tom Ford tuxedo, he looked less like a titan and more like a statue, impeccably carved, powerful, but emotionally remote. His gaze was fixed, not on the grand entrance where his bride was due to appear, but on some distant point beyond the walls, a place where balance sheets and blueprints made more sense than vows. Then the music swelled and Sabrina Monroe appeared. She was a vision of calculated perfection. Her couture gown, a cascade of silk and hand-sewn pearls, was a masterpiece of modern design. Her blonde hair was swept into an intricate chignon, and her smile was a brilliant, sharp-edged weapon she wielded with practiced ease. As she glided down the aisle, she was every inch the glamorous influencer who had built an empire on the illusion of a perfect life. But as a waiter offered her father a glass of water, her smile tightened. "Not now," she murmured, the words a blade of ice. "Don't obstruct the photographer's line of sight." The waiter recoiled, and the illusion flickered for just a second. The ceremony was about to begin when a new sound pierced the delicate melody of the string quartet. It was a wail, thin at first, then joined by another. In the front row, a flustered nanny bounced two identical bundles of white lace, the one-year-old twins Leo and Lily. The crying grew louder, more insistent. The guests shifted uncomfortably. Julian's stoic expression finally broke, a flicker of uncertainty crossing his face. Sabrina's mask didn't just crack, it shattered. Her perfectly painted lips pulled back into a snarl, her blue eyes flashing with a fury that had nothing to do with maternal concern. This was the fury of a director whose meticulously planned production was being ruined by unruly extras. "Do something," she hissed at the nanny, her voice low but carrying in the sudden silence. The nanny fumbled with a bottle, then a pacifier, but the twins only cried harder, their tiny faces red and crumpled. The disruption was an intolerable stain on Sabrina's perfect day. "My gown," she seethed, glancing down at the priceless fabric. "Get them out of here now." The command was sharp, cold, and loud enough for the first 3 rows to hear. It wasn't a request, it was an order to remove a nuisance. Watching from the shadows of a service entrance was Aaliyah Reed. Dressed in the standard black uniform of the catering staff, she was invisible to the guests. Just another part of the machinery that made such events run. But she saw everything. She saw the twins weren't just being fussy, they were overstimulated and distressed. She saw the panic in the young nanny's eyes. And she saw the chilling emptiness in Sabrina Monroe's. Aaliyah's hands, which had been arranging canapes moments before, clenched into fists. Every instinct, every lesson from her early childhood development classes at Loyola, screamed that those babies needed comfort, not banishment. Risking a reprimand, risking her job, she felt her feet moving. She emerged from the shadows, her steps quiet but purposeful. "Mr. Vance?" she said softly, her voice a calm island in the sea of tension. Julian's head snapped toward her, his eyes wide with a desperate plea for a solution. "I think I can help." Sabrina scoffed audibly. "We don't need help from the catering staff." But Julian ignored her, his gaze locked on Aaliyah's. He saw something in her eyes that he hadn't seen in Sabrina's all morning, genuine concern. He gave a single sharp nod. With an expert's grace, Aaliyah approached the nanny. "May I?" she asked gently. The overwhelmed nanny practically handed the wailing infants over. Aaliyah took them both, her movements fluid and confident. She scanned the room, her eyes landing on an empty decorations table. She pointed to the silk table runner. "Could you pass me that, please?" she asked a nearby waiter. In seconds, she had fashioned the silk into a makeshift wrap, securing both babies snugly against her chest. Then she began to sway, a gentle rhythmic motion, humming a low, steady tune that was barely audible. The ballroom fell into a hushed awe. Within a minute, Leo's cries softened into whimpers, and Lily's tiny body relaxed against Aaliyah's shoulder. Their eyelids fluttered and the storm passed. Aaliyah hadn't performed a miracle. She had simply offered what was needed: security, warmth, and a calming rhythm. The silence was broken by Sabrina. Enraged, her face flushed with the ugly stain of humiliation, she strode toward Aaliyah. "Who do you think you are?" she spat, her voice dripping with venom. "You put my children in a dirty table runner? You're the help. You will be fired for this." That was it. That was the moment everything changed for Julian. He looked from his now peaceful, sleeping children in the arms of a stranger, to the beautiful, monstrous woman he was about to marry. He saw the chasm between them, a chasm filled with everything that truly mattered. Aaliyah's quiet competence stood in stark contrast to Sabrina's performative cruelty. He had built his life on solid foundations, on deals sealed with integrity. What he was about to do was build a family on a lie. He took Sabrina's arm, his grip firm. "We need to talk," he said, his voice dangerously calm. He led his fuming fiancée into a side room. The guests murmured, their whispers filling the vast ballroom. Less than 5 minutes later, Julian emerged alone. He walked back to the altar, his face pale but his jaw set like stone. He took the microphone from the bewildered officiant. "I apologize to everyone for bringing you here today," he announced, his voice echoing through the silent room. "There will be no wedding. This was a mistake." He looked out at the sea of shocked faces, but his gaze settled on Aaliyah, who still held his children, a silent guardian in the wreckage of his life. He had just detonated his carefully constructed world, and in its place was a terrifying, unknown future as a single father. But for the first time in a long time, he felt like he had made a decision that was real. Sabrina's cold-hearted fury at her own crying babies is a massive red flag. Hit that subscribe button if you believe children deserve compassion, not contempt. Only someone who agrees with Sabrina's cruel behavior would just scroll on by. The silence in the chauffeured Escalade on the ride back to the penthouse was heavier than the shame hanging in the ballroom. Julian Vance sat rigid, staring out at the Chicago skyline he had helped build, a city of clean lines and predictable logic. Beside him, in their state-of-the-art car seats, Leo and Lily had finally cried themselves to sleep. The nanny, a young woman named Clara, huddled in the passenger seat, her phone clutched in a white-knuckled grip, already vibrating with notifications. They stepped out of the private elevator directly into the cavernous living room of his penthouse. Floor-to-ceiling windows showcased a billion-dollar view of Lake Michigan, but inside, the space was a museum of a life devoid of children. A glass coffee table held a single, perfect art book. A precarious metal sculpture twisted toward the ceiling. The floor was a polished sea of white marble. As soon as Clara placed the twins in their cribs in the pristine, barely used nursery, she turned to Julian, her eyes wide with terror. "Mr. Vance, I'm so sorry I can't," she stammered, already backing away. "She'll ruin me. Sabrina. She knows everyone. My agency will blacklist me. I have to go." Before Julian could form a response, she was gone, leaving behind a hastily scribbled note with a few feeding times and a 3-ring binder labeled "The Twins." The heavy front door clicked shut, sealing Julian in with his decision. And then the screaming began. A synchronized, dual-pitched wail that echoed off the marble and glass, amplifying the chaos. Julian approached the cribs like a bomb disposal expert approaching an unexploded ordnance. He picked up Lily, who felt fragile and impossibly small in his arms. He bounced her awkwardly, mimicking something he'd seen Clara do. She only screamed louder. Leo, seeing his sister's distress, joined in, his face turning a deep, alarming shade of red. Panic, cold and sharp, seized him. He fumbled through a diaper change, a clumsy, frustrating ballet of adhesive tabs and wriggling limbs. He tried to decipher the baby Bible, the binder Clara had left, but its pages of schedules and preferences might as well have been written in ancient Greek. He warmed a bottle to the wrong temperature, then another. An hour bled into 2. He was a man who commanded boardrooms, who could dissect a 100-page legal contract in minutes, yet he was utterly defeated by 2 20-pound humans. His perfect world had become his personal prison, and he was the sole, incompetent warden. Just as he managed to get Leo to take a few sips from a bottle, his phone, which had been buzzing intermittently, began to vibrate with a furious, unending rhythm. He glanced at the screen. Hundreds of notifications. Texts from his business partners, his sister, even his estranged mother. He swiped open his social media app and the air left his lungs. The digital assassination had begun. Sabrina Monroe, a master artist of public perception, had painted her masterpiece. The post was a selfie expertly framed. Her makeup was artfully smudged, a single perfect tear tracing a path down her cheek. Her expression was one of beautiful, tragic heartbreak. The caption was a work of devastating genius. I never imagined a day that started with so much hope would end like this. Abandoned at the altar. My heart is shattered, not for me but for my beautiful children. I will fight to protect them from a world of coldness and power that I no longer recognize. Please pray for us. It was a lie. A beautiful, glittering, weaponized lie. And it was working. The likes were climbing into the tens of thousands. The comments were a torrent of venom directed squarely at him. Monster. Sociopath. How could anyone do that to the mother of their children? Money really does corrupt everything. He was being tried and convicted in the court of public opinion, and Sabrina was both the star witness and the grieving judge. He was losing a war he hadn't even known was being fought. Another wave of screaming erupted from the nursery. Leo had spit up the little milk he'd taken all over Julian's expensive shirt. Lily was still wailing, her small body stiff with distress. Julian felt the walls of his perfect penthouse closing in, the weight of his children's needs and the world's judgment crushing him. He was failing. Utterly and completely. Through the fog of panic and failure, one image cut through the noise. A young woman in a black uniform, her expression calm, her hands sure. The woman who had quieted the storm with nothing more than a piece of silk and a soft hum. Aaliyah. He grabbed his phone, ignoring the flood of hateful notifications, and called his assistant. The wedding. The catering company. Get me their manager now. Minutes later, he was on the phone with a flustered manager, his voice clipped and commanding. I need the contact information for one of your staff. Aaliyah Reed. Sir, I can't give out employee information. Find her. Julian cut in, his voice leaving no room for argument. And tell her I will pay her triple whatever she's making now. 20 minutes later, his phone rang with an unfamiliar number. He answered on the first ring. Hello. On the other end, Aaliyah Reed stood in the humid, rumbling sub-basement laundry of the Astor Grand, a world away from the penthouse. She had been demoted that afternoon, her supervisor making it clear she was lucky to still have a job at all. This is Aaliyah, she said, her voice wary. Ms. Reed. This is Julian Vance. He didn't waste time. He explained the situation. The nanny was gone, the twins were distraught, he was in over his head. He didn't plead, he stated facts. Then he made his offer. I'll pay you a salary that will cover your entire university tuition. For 1 year. All I need is your help. Temporary. Until I can figure this out. Aaliyah was silent for a long moment, the noise of the industrial dryers filling the space between them. She thought of Sabrina Monroe's cruel, beautiful face. She thought of the mountain of student loan debt waiting for her. But mostly she thought of 2 crying babies in a cold, sterile home with a father who was completely lost. Okay, Mr. Vance, she said, her voice small but clear against the noise of the laundry. I'll do it. Aaliyah Reed arrived not like an employee, but like a first responder to a disaster scene. She stepped out of the private elevator into the echoing silence of Julian's penthouse, her expression calm and professional, but her eyes taking in every detail with the sharp assessment of an expert. The place was beautiful, a monument to wealth and taste, but to her, it was a minefield. The glass coffee table was a head injury waiting to happen. The razor-sharp edges of a minimalist steel sculpture were a toddler's worst nightmare. The gleaming marble floors offered no purchase for crawling knees. It wasn't a home, it was an art installation. Where do we begin? Julian asked, his voice strained. He was a man accustomed to giving orders, but now he was asking for direction, completely adrift. We begin by making it safe, Aaliyah said simply. She didn't wait for permission. She walked to the living room, assessed the glass table, and looked at Julian. This has to go into storage. Today. Within hours, the penthouse began its transformation. Aaliyah, armed with Julian's credit card and an encyclopedic knowledge of child development, orchestrated a complete overhaul. The glass table was replaced by a large, plush ottoman. A thick, soft wool rug covered the unforgiving marble. The dangerous sculpture was dismantled and put away, its place taken by a colorful playpen filled with sensory toys. She established zones. A quiet corner for reading with soft pillows, a play area with low, sturdy shelves, and a feeding station in the kitchen with a proper high chair, not the sleek, impractical one he'd had. But her most important project was Julian himself. She didn't just take over, she taught. Her first lesson was written on a large whiteboard she installed in the kitchen. It was a schedule broken into neat, color-coded blocks. 7 a.m. wake and feed, 9 a.m. playtime, 10:30 a.m. nap. Babies don't thrive on spontaneity, Mr. Vance, she explained, handing him a bottle. They thrive on routine. It's how they learn to trust the world. He was a clumsy, reluctant student. His first attempts at swaddling looked more like he was wrestling a small alligator. He was stiff and awkward when she showed him how to hold both twins, one in the crook of each arm. But Aaliyah was endlessly patient. Let them feel your heartbeat, she'd say softly. Breathe with them. While Julian was learning the fundamentals of fatherhood, Sabrina was conducting a masterclass in modern warfare. Her social media had become a shrine to her supposed suffering. She posted artful black and white throwback photos of herself in the hospital with the newborn twins, cropped to erase the nanny who had been holding them just out of frame. The captions were devastating. Missing these tiny hands and mine. A mother's heart is never whole when she's kept from her children. The first real blow landed during a conference call. Julian, we have a problem, his partner, Frank, said, his voice tight with panic. The investors for the Lincoln Yards project are getting cold feet. My wife showed me what Sabrina's posting. They're citing the moral turpitude clause in their preliminary agreement. They're worried about the negative publicity. Julian clicked over to Sabrina's profile. Her latest post was a video. She was sitting in a perfectly lit room, dabbing at her eyes, speaking in a trembling voice about the importance of family values and how she was fighting to give her children a stable two-parent home. The narrative was clear. She was the valiant mother, and he was the unstable, cold-hearted villain. He hung up the phone, a cold fury simmering in his gut. He was losing control of the story of his own life. Back in the living room, Aaliyah was on the floor with Leo and Lily. Your turn, she said, motioning for Julian to join them. It was time for lunch. He sat, feeling foolish, as Aaliyah showed him how to make the mashed bananas more appealing by making airplane noises. He tried, his voice a low rumble. Leo turned his head away. Be sillier, Aaliyah encouraged. He can sense you're not committed. Julian took a deep breath, shed a layer of his pride, and tried again, his voice higher, his movements more animated. Here comes the banana plane for a landing, he boomed. Leo watched him, a tiny smile playing on his lips, and opened his mouth. A small spoonful of banana went in. It was a victory more satisfying than closing a billion-dollar deal. Later that afternoon, while the twins napped, he learned to soothe them using Aaliyah's techniques. He practiced shushing and swaying with a teddy bear until he felt the rhythm. He was rewiring decades of stoic corporate behavior. The true breakthrough came that evening. He was on the new soft rug with Lily, who was just starting to crawl. On an impulse, he ducked behind a large cushion. Where's Daddy? He murmured. He waited a beat, then popped his head out with a wide, goofy grin. Peekaboo. Lily's face, which had been a mask of intense concentration, suddenly split open into a radiant, gummy smile. A sound he'd never heard before filled the room, a pure, delighted shriek of infant laughter. It was the most beautiful sound he had ever heard. It wasn't a cry of need, but a sound of pure joy, and he had caused it. He did it again, and she laughed even harder, her whole body shaking with glee. He looked up at Aaliyah, who was watching from the doorway, and his eyes were shining with a profound, raw emotion. She simply gave him a small, knowing nod. In that moment, he wasn't a tycoon or a defendant in the court of public opinion. He was just a father. His phone buzzed, pulling him back to the other war. It was an alert from a popular gossip blog. The headline was brutal. Julian Vance's ice-cold world. Source claims billionaire saw his own children as legacy assets. The article was a collection of half-truths and outright lies, clearly fed by Sabrina's camp, painting him as a monster incapable of love. Sabrina is twisting the entire story online to ruin Julian's life, playing the ultimate victim. If you can't stand manipulators who use social media to spread lies, comment "Truth wins" below. Let's show the algorithm we don't fall for toxic narratives. Aaliyah found him later, standing at the floor-to-ceiling windows, staring down at the city lights. His hands were clenched at his sides. "This is a lie," he said, his voice a low growl. "All of it." Aaliyah came to stand beside him, her gaze following his. Then she looked back into the softly lit living room, where Leo and Lily were sleeping peacefully in their playpen, their chests rising and falling in perfect rhythm. "Yes, it is," she said, her voice a quiet anchor in his storm. "But this," she gestured to the twins, "is real. That is just noise. You have to choose what you're going to build, Mr. Vance, and what you're going to ignore." He looked from the glittering, indifferent city that represented the war he was losing, to the two small, breathing reasons he had to fight. For the first time, he knew which foundation was the one worth building on. The autumn air in Lincoln Park was crisp, carrying the scent of damp earth and the distant sweetness of a roasted nut cart. Julian felt profoundly out of place. He was surrounded by a sea of strollers, brightly colored diaper bags, and parents in comfortable, practical clothing. He, in his tailored slacks and cashmere sweater, felt like an undercover agent on a mission he didn't understand. Aaliyah had insisted. "They need to be around other kids, Mr. Vance," she'd said. "And so do you." He stood awkwardly by the sandbox, watching Leo methodically pour sand into a bucket while Lily attempted to eat a fistful of it. A man in a faded Cubs hoodie sidled up next to him. "First time?" the man asked, nodding toward Lily. "Mine tried to eat a worm last week. I swear, you turn your back for a second and they're trying to find new and creative ways to die." Julian, expecting a conversation about interest rates or property taxes, was momentarily speechless. "She seems to enjoy the texture," he finally managed, a small, uncertain smile on his face. "I'm Mike," the man said, extending a hand. "That's Chloe." He pointed to a little girl gleefully throwing sand at a pigeon. "We're deep in the no phase. It's her only word." "Chloe, want a snack?" "No." "Chloe, time to go?" "No." "Chloe, is Daddy your favorite person in the whole world?" "No." Julian chuckled, a real, unforced sound. "I'm Julian. Leo and Lily." Before he could say more, a shriek erupted from the play structure. Leo had just snatched a bright red truck from another little boy, who immediately dissolved into a full-body, high-decibel meltdown. The old Julian would have frozen, mortified by the public display. But Aaliyah's voice echoed in his head. Get down on his level. Acknowledge his feelings. Redirect. He knelt in the woodchips, putting himself directly in Leo's line of sight. "Leo," he said calmly, his voice even, "that was not kind. It's Lucas's turn with the truck. You can have a turn when he is finished." He didn't yell, he didn't snatch the toy back. He gently took Leo's hand and offered him another option. "Look, the blue car is free. Why don't we make the blue car go down the big slide?" Leo, surprised by the calm response, looked from the red truck to the blue car, his little mind processing. After a moment's hesitation, he dropped the truck and toddled toward the slide. The other boy's mom gave Julian a look of deep, appreciative solidarity. Walking back to the penthouse, pushing the double stroller through the city streets, Julian felt a surge of something he hadn't experienced in years: simple, uncomplicated pride. He had handled a normal parent problem and hadn't failed. It felt, for a fleeting moment, like they were a real family unit, navigating the small, ordinary challenges of a Saturday afternoon. That feeling lingered into the evening. After the twins were bathed, read to, and sleeping soundly, a quiet settled over the apartment. Julian walked into the kitchen to find Aaliyah at the stove, stirring a simple pasta sauce. The aroma of garlic and basil filled the air, a scent that was quickly replacing the sterile emptiness that had once defined the space. "I can order something," he said, the old habit dying hard. "It's already done," she replied, not looking up from the pot. "Sit. You look tired." They ate at the small table in the kitchen, not the grand dining room that hadn't been used in months. The conversation flowed easily, moving past the twins' schedules for the first time. He asked about her classes, and she spoke with passion about child psychology, about the critical importance of the first 3 years of a child's life. She asked him about his work, and instead of talking about profit margins, he found himself telling her about the community center he'd helped fund in Pilsen, a project he'd cared about but had never spoken of personally. It sounds like you want to build more than just skyscrapers, she observed, her gaze direct and intelligent. I used to think that's all there was, he admitted, looking at her across the table. In the soft light of the kitchen, with her hair tied back and a smudge of flour on her cheek, she was more beautiful than any woman he'd ever seen in a couture gown. An unspoken energy hummed between them, a current of mutual respect and a deeper, more fragile attraction. The professional line they had so carefully drawn was beginning to blur. The doorbell, sharp and intrusive, shattered the moment. I'll get it, Julian said, annoyed at the interruption. He expected a late delivery. Instead, he found a uniformed courier holding a crisp, legal-sized envelope. He signed for it, his brow furrowed. Back in the kitchen, he slit the envelope open. Aaliyah watched, her expression curious. His face went pale. The document was thick, filled with dense legal jargon, but the words at the top were brutally clear. Petition for sole custody. He sank into a chair, his hands shaking as he scanned the pages. Sabrina was suing for full legal and physical custody, citing his unstable and volatile behavior. She was also demanding an amount of child support so astronomical it was clearly designed to be punitive. But that wasn't the worst part. Tucked into the back of the motion was an appendix labeled Exhibit A, Nanny's Journal. He started reading. It was a collection of typed entries, supposedly written by their former nanny, Clara. They were meticulous, dated, and utterly false. October 5th, J. Seemed angry that Lily wouldn't stop crying during his conference call. He referred to her distress as unproductive noise. Seemed to have no paternal instinct. October 9th, J. Insisted on a rigid, impractical schedule that ignored the twins' needs. When I tried to adjust nap time, he became controlling and said I was undermining his authority. October 12th, the apartment is not safe. I saw Leo crawling near an exposed electrical socket and J. Didn't even notice. He is completely negligent. The lies were vicious, personal, and cleverly constructed to paint him as the monster from her social media posts. He felt the air leave his body, the quiet hope of the last few hours turning to ash in his mouth. The battle wasn't just online anymore. It had come into his home. This wasn't a fight about money or reputation. Sabrina was coming for his children, and she was willing to burn down the entire world with her lies to win. Sabrina is now using outright fabrications to steal Julian's children. Smash that like button if you believe using lies and forged evidence to win is disgusting. Let's send a message that integrity matters more than Sabrina Monroe's vile schemes. The leather-bound legal document felt like a dead weight in Julian's hands. He and his lawyer, Richard Croft, sat in the sterile silence of Julian's home office, the damning pages of Exhibit A spread across the polished mahogany desk. For the past hour, they had dissected every line of the forged journal, and the conclusion was as baffling as it was infuriating. These details are too specific, Julian, Richard said, rubbing his temples. A reference to your private call with the Tokyo investors? The name of the teething gel you asked Clara to pick up? The exact time you left for your board meeting on October 12th? This isn't just a fabrication, it's an intimate one. Sabrina couldn't have known these things. It has to be the nanny, Julian insisted, the words tasting like acid. Sabrina must have paid her off. Clara was the only other person here. The thought of the young, terrified nanny betraying him was galling, but it was the only logical explanation. Richard was skeptical. She seemed genuinely terrified of Sabrina. A woman scared for her career doesn't usually stick around to document your every move for the enemy. But Julian had to know. He tracked Clara down through her former agency, assuring them it wasn't about litigation but a personal matter. When he finally got her on the phone, her voice was a trembling whisper. She was working for a family in the suburbs, hoping to stay off Sabrina's radar. Mr. Vance, I swear on my life, I never wrote any of that, she sobbed into the phone after he read her a few of the entries. I wouldn't know how. I told you she'll ruin me. I just want to be left alone. Her fear was too raw, too genuine to be an act. She was a pawn, not a player. He hung up, a cold knot tightening in his stomach. If it wasn't Clara, then who? Who was the ghost in his house? Frustrated and cornered, Julian fell back on the skills that had made him a tycoon. He didn't just build buildings. He analyzed systems, identified weaknesses, and exploited them. His life was now a system with a critical vulnerability, and he would find it. He started his own quiet, methodical investigation. He wasn't looking for a person. He was looking for a data trail. He spent the next 48 hours walled up in his office, fueled by black coffee and a cold, simmering rage. He pulled the access logs from his smart home system, his personal email server, and his encrypted calendar. He hired a discreet team of forensic accountants, the best in Chicago, to do a deep dive into the finances of every person on his household and personal staff over the past 6 months. It felt paranoid, invasive, but Sabrina had left him no choice. The first clue was subtle. An access log showed his private digital calendar had been viewed at 3:17 a.m. on a Tuesday. He'd been asleep. A week later, a file on his personal server containing notes for a business trip was accessed long after he'd left the office. The IP address was internal from his company's network, but the timestamp was outside of business hours. Then the accountants called. They had found nothing on the household staff, nothing on Clara. But they had found an anomaly. A series of large, structured cash deposits into the personal account of his executive assistant, Isabel Reyes. Julian felt the floor drop out from under him. Isabel. It wasn't possible. Isabel had been with him for nearly a decade. She had started as a junior admin and risen to become the gatekeeper of his entire professional and personal life. She knew his schedule better than he did. She managed his travel, his appointments, his private contacts. She had organized his mother's surprise 70th birthday party. She had sent flowers to his sister after her surgery. He trusted her implicitly. She was practically family. The accountants had dug deeper. The deposits were coming from a recently established marketing and PR shell corporation. A few more clicks through public records and the connection was made. The sole director of the shell company was Sabrina Monroe's business manager. The betrayal was so profound, so absolute, it left him breathless. Every specific detail in the journal clicked into place. Every private conversation, every last-minute schedule change. Isabel had known it all. She had been the ghost. He called her the next morning. Isabel, I need you to come to the penthouse. We have an urgent matter to discuss. His voice was unnervingly calm. When she arrived, she looked professional as always in her tailored suit, her tablet in hand. Good morning, Julian. What's the emergency? He didn't answer. He simply gestured to the chair opposite his desk and closed the office door. He let the silence hang in the air, watching her. For the first time, he noticed the faint tremor in her hand as she set her tablet down. He began calmly, laying out printouts on the desk one by one. Exhibit A, he said, pushing a security log across the polished wood. My calendar was accessed from your work terminal at 3:17 a.m. on October 7th. Can you explain that? Isabel paled. I was working late, preparing for the merger. Exhibit B, he continued, sliding another paper forward. These are the notes from my private call with the Tokyo investors. They were stored on a server only you and I have access to. Yet, the exact phrasing from this call appeared in this. He dropped the forged journal on top of the log. Her composure began to crack. Julian, I don't know what you're implying. Exhibit C, he said, his voice dropping to a low, dangerous growl. He laid out the bank statements, the series of deposits circled in red ink. And beside it, the incorporation documents for the shell company, with Sabrina's business manager's name clearly visible. This is a shell corp owned by Sabrina. And this is its money in your account. Now you're going to tell me exactly what you've done. That's when she broke. The tears came hot and fast, ugly sobs that shook her entire body. The confession tumbled out, a pathetic story of resentment, ambition, and manipulation. Sabrina had approached her weeks before the wedding, preying on Isabel's feeling of being underappreciated, of always being the assistant and never the principal. She'd promised her money, of course, but she had also promised her a future, a C-suite position in the media empire they would build together. She told me you'd never see me as anything more than the person who gets your coffee, Isabel cried. She said you didn't respect me. She made me feel seen. Julian just stared at her, the woman he had trusted with his life, and felt nothing but a vast, cold emptiness. The web of deceit was intricate, masterfully woven, and he had been living inside it for months without a clue. Finding out your most trusted employee is a spy is the ultimate betrayal. If you believe loyalty is priceless, hit subscribe right now. People who backstab for money like Isabel will never understand. He didn't fire her. He didn't yell. He just said, "Get out." As Isabel scrambled from the room, leaving her confession hanging like poison in the air, Julian's phone rang. It was Richard. He sounded grim. "Julian, I have bad news. The judge just ruled on Sabrina's motion." "And?" Julian asked, his voice flat, devoid of emotion. "It's worse than we thought," Richard said, and Julian could hear the strain in his voice. The judge found the journal entries deeply concerning and credible. "She's granting Sabrina's motion for an emergency psychological evaluation. For you. And Julian, she's temporarily suspended your unsupervised time with the children pending the results. A court-appointed supervisor will be assigned. You can't be alone with them." The words hit him like a physical blow. He slowly lowered the phone, the connection to Richard dead. His gaze drifted from his empty office, the scene of the ultimate betrayal, toward the nursery down the hall. Through the open door, he could see Aaliyah sitting in the rocking chair, a soft lamp casting a warm glow around her. Leo and Lily were asleep in her arms, their small bodies rising and falling in peaceful rhythm as she read to them from a picture book in a quiet, gentle whisper. He looked at the perfect, fragile picture of the home he was fighting to build, and realized with a sickening certainty that he was about to lose it all. The psychological evaluation was held in a beige, windowless room that smelled of stale coffee and institutional despair. The therapist, a man with a practiced, neutral expression, asked questions that were less like inquiries and more like carefully laid traps. Each one was a poisoned dart, tipped with the lies from Isabel's fabricated journal. "Mr. Vance, the journal alleges you refer to your children's emotional needs as unproductive noise. Would you say that's an accurate reflection of your parenting philosophy?" Julian kept his hands clasped on the table in front of him, forcing his knuckles to remain white, not from anger, but from the sheer effort of staying calm. "No," he said, his voice a low, even baritone. "I would say that's an accurate reflection of a lie designed to harm my family. It also describes an incident where you allegedly left your son crawling near an exposed electrical socket. Do you recall this?" "I recall an electrician being in my home to install childproof covers on every outlet in the penthouse," Julian countered, his gaze unwavering. "A measure I ordered the day after I became the twins' primary caregiver." For 2 grueling hours, he parried and deflected, his mind a razor-sharp instrument of defense. He refused to be baited. He refused to show the anger and frustration that was churning in his gut. He knew that was the goal, to provoke him, to make him look like the volatile monster from Sabrina's narrative. When he walked out of the office, he felt hollowed out, as if he'd survived a multi-car pileup without a scratch, yet was shaking with the aftershock of the impact. He wasn't alone with the twins anymore. A court-appointed supervisor, a stern, silent woman named Ms. Gable, now shadowed his every move in the penthouse. She observed, she took notes, her very presence a constant, suffocating reminder that the court believed he was a potential danger to his own children. Aaliyah saw the toll it was taking on him. He was a lion in a cage, powerful but trapped, and the stress was beginning to fray the edges of his formidable composure. That evening, after Ms. Gable had left for the day, Aaliyah approached him with a plan. "They need more stimulation," she began, her tone gentle but firm. "They need to be around other children in a structured environment. And we," she said, pointedly including him, "need a secure location. A place with professional protocols that can't be manipulated." She had already done the research. She presented him with a brochure for a place called Bright Beginnings, a high-security early learning center in a discreet downtown location. It catered to the children of high-profile Chicagoans and was known for its rigorous safety measures. "Sabrina is escalating," Aaliyah said, her expression serious. "She's not just fighting you with lies anymore, she's fighting you with the system. We need to build our own systems to protect them." Julian agreed without hesitation. The next day he and Aaliyah toured the facility. The director, a calm and capable woman named Anya Sharma, walked them through the protocols. Keycard access, biometric scanners at the entrance, and a strict pickup policy. "We will need a list of authorized guardians," Ms. Sharma explained. Aaliyah was prepared. She handed over a folder. "There are only 4, she stated clearly. "Julian Vance, myself, Aaliyah Reed, our housekeeper Maria, and our emergency contact, Dr. Alistair Finch. Each of us will have a photo ID on file. Furthermore, We require a verbal password for any unscheduled pickup. Miss Sharma nodded, impressed. And the password? Aaliyah looked at Julian. Lincoln Park Carousel, she said. It was the site of his first, small victory as a father. A place Sabrina knew nothing about. Her foresight paid off less than a week later. Julian was in a tense meeting with his lawyers when his private phone, the one he had given to the daycare, buzzed with an urgent call. Mr. Vance, this is Anya Sharma at Bright Beginnings. The twins are perfectly fine, but you should be aware that Miss Sabrina Monroe is here attempting to pick them up. Ice flooded Julian's veins. Do not release them, he said, already standing, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. I'm on my way. Rest assured, Mr. Vance. We are following your protocols, Miss Sharma's calm voice replied. She's in my office now. When Julian burst through the doors of Bright Beginnings 10 minutes later, he was met with a scene of controlled chaos. Sabrina was in the director's office, her voice rising in theatrical desperation. She was dressed in her concerned mother costume, a soft cashmere sweater and simple jeans. She was waving a sheaf of papers in Miss Sharma's face. This is a court order. Sabrina insisted, her voice trembling with manufactured panic. There has been a family medical emergency. I am their mother, and I have every right to take them. Miss Sharma, seated calmly behind her desk, did not flinch. Ms. Monroe, as I've explained, these documents don't align with the custody schedule we have on file. And for any emergency removal, our policy requires a verbal password. A password? That's ridiculous. I'm telling you it's an emergency. Then you'll have no problem providing the password, Miss Sharma said, her tone polite but unyielding. Sabrina's face contorted, her mask of concern slipping to reveal the raw entitlement beneath. I don't have time for these games. My assistant must have forgotten to give it to me. Now bring me my children. I'm afraid I can't do that, Miss Sharma said. It was then that Sabrina saw Julian standing in the doorway. She tried to pivot back to victimhood, her eyes welling with crocodile tears. Julian, thank God. Tell this woman to let me have my babies. Your mother has had a fall. My mother is in Palm Beach, Julian said, his voice dangerously quiet. And those documents are forgeries. He looked past her to Miss Sharma, who gave a subtle nod toward the corner of the ceiling. A small black dome was mounted there, a security camera, its red light blinking with silent, impartial diligence. It had captured everything. As if on cue, 2 uniformed police officers entered the reception area, alerted by the director's discreet call a few minutes earlier. The color drained from Sabrina's face. The game was up. Her desperate gambit, her attempt to physically snatch the children and create a media firestorm, had not only failed, it had been recorded. Attempting to abduct your own children from daycare is a new low, even for Sabrina. Comment, protect the innocent, if you believe using kids as pawns in a twisted game is pure evil. Only Sabrina supporters would stay silent on this. The family courtroom was a chamber of hushed hostility. The air, stripped of emotion by polished wood and the stern gaze of the state seal, was thick with tension. Julian sat beside his lawyer, Richard Croft, his posture rigid, his face a mask of controlled calm. Across the aisle, Sabrina Monroe was the picture of somber grace, dressed in a conservative navy dress, her expression one of profound, maternal concern. It was a masterful performance. Sabrina's lawyer, a sharp, silver-haired woman with a reputation for eviscerating witnesses, opened the proceedings. She painted a picture of Julian as a volatile, work-obsessed narcissist, a man who viewed his children as legacy assets rather than human beings. She presented the forged journal as a heartbreaking, contemporaneous account from a terrified nanny. She then introduced the results of Julian's psychological evaluation, skillfully twisting its inconclusive findings into a narrative of potential instability. What we have here, Your Honor, she argued, her voice resonating with conviction, is a classic case of coercive control. A powerful man, unable to handle a relationship with an equal, has systematically isolated his children and fallen under the influence of a young, opportunistic employee, Ms. Aaliyah Reed, who has clearly positioned herself to replace Ms. Monroe in every capacity. For a horrifying moment, it felt like the lies were winning. The judge, a stern, no-nonsense woman named Judge Harrison, listened with an unreadable expression. Julian felt a cold dread seep into his bones. The truth felt fragile, breakable, against the force of such a well-constructed fiction. Then it was Richard Croft's turn. "The petitioner has presented a compelling work of fiction, Your Honor," he began calmly. "We are here today to present the facts. I call Isabel Reyes to the stand." A palpable shock went through Sabrina's side of the room. Isabel, looking pale and terrified, walked slowly to the witness box. Under Richard's precise, methodical questioning, and with the threat of perjury and a separate civil lawsuit hanging over her, she confessed. She told the court everything: how Sabrina had preyed on her insecurities, the promises of money and power, the secret transfer of information, and the collaborative effort to invent every single word in the nanny's journal. "So, to be clear, Ms. Reyes," Richard concluded, his voice ringing through the silent courtroom, "this entire journal, the cornerstone of the petitioner's case, is a complete and utter fabrication authored by you and Ms. Monroe?" "Yes," Isabel whispered, her voice cracking. "It's all lies." Sabrina didn't flinch, but a faint, tight line appeared around her mouth. Richard wasn't finished. "Your Honor, we now present into evidence a video file from the Bright Beginnings Early Learning Center, dated October 24th. The courtroom monitors flickered to life. The silent, high-definition security footage began to play. The court watched as Sabrina, the picture of a concerned mother, presented forged documents. They watched as the daycare director calmly denied her entry. And then they watched the mask of civility melt away. The video showed Sabrina's face contorting in pure, undiluted rage. Her voice, captured by the camera's microphone, was shrill and demanding. They saw her lies about the family emergency, her threats, her condescension. The calm, grieving mother from the witness stand was replaced by a furious, entitled woman attempting to abduct her children. The video ended. The silence in the room was absolute. The judge stared at the blank screen for a long moment before turning her gaze to Sabrina, one eyebrow raised in silent, damning judgment. Just when it seemed the case was over, Sabrina's lawyer stood. "Your Honor, the defense calls a surprise rebuttal witness. Mr. Marcus Reed." Aaliyah, sitting in the front row, went rigid. A disheveled man in his late 50s, a man she hadn't seen in over a decade, was being sworn in. It was her father. He was a pathetic, broken figure, but he spoke the lines he'd been fed with a practiced misery. He painted Aaliyah as an unstable, manipulative opportunist. "She was always like this," he mumbled, avoiding her gaze. "Always looking for an angle, a way to latch onto people with money. She's not stable. Never has been." It was a vicious, desperate move, a character assassination designed to poison the well. But Richard Croft rose for the cross-examination, his expression one of calm pity. "Mr. Reed," he began gently, "when was the last time you saw your daughter before today?" A few years ago," he stammered. "Isn't it true, Mr. Reed, that you haven't seen or spoken to Ms. Aaliyah Reed in 10 years, not since you abandoned her and her mother?" Richard's voice was still soft, but it held the sharp edge of a scalpel. Her father deflated. "Yeah, well. And isn't it also true, sir, that you received a wire transfer for $50,000 2 days ago from the same shell corporation that was paying Ms. Isabel Reyes?" Richard held up a printed bank record. "A payment for your testimony today?" The man crumbled completely, mumbling incoherently. The move had backfired spectacularly, revealing not a flaw in Aaliyah's character, but the horrifying depths of Sabrina's depravity. Finally, Richard called his last witness. "The defense calls Aaliyah Reed." Aaliyah walked to the stand with a quiet dignity that seemed to suck all the venom out of the room. She did not look at her father or at Sabrina. She looked only at the judge. Sabrina's lawyer tried to rattle her with snide questions about her relationship with Julian, but Aaliyah remained unflappable. "My relationship with Mr. Vance is professional," she stated simply. "My relationship with his children is my primary focus." When Richard began his questions, he didn't ask about the drama or the lies. He asked about the twins. "Ms. Reed, can you tell the court about Leo's progress with his motor skills?" And Aaliyah began to speak. She spoke with the quiet, detailed authority of someone who lives and breathes the daily reality of these children's lives. She described how Leo loved the color blue, but only in dark shades. How Lily needed to be held for 3 minutes, no more, no less, before she would fall asleep for her nap. She detailed their vocabulary growth, their favorite foods, their first steps, which Julian had proudly recorded. She presented a picture not of a volatile household, but of a stable, predictable, and loving home built on patience and routine, a home Julian Vance had fought to create. Her testimony wasn't an attack, it was an undeniable, unshakable truth. Her genuine love and expertise were the most powerful evidence in the room. When she finished, Judge Harrison looked from Aaliyah's honest, open face to Sabrina's cold, beautiful mask. The decision was no longer difficult. After reviewing all evidence presented, the judge announced, her voice leaving no room for appeal, including the petitioner's clear pattern of deceit, manipulation, and a disturbing attempt to remove the children from a secure facility with fraudulent documents. This court finds it is in the best interest of the children, Leo and Ethan Vance, to award sole legal and physical custody to their father, Mr. Julian Vance. A gasp went through the courtroom. Julian closed his eyes, a single silent tear tracing a path down his cheek. He had won. He reached back and found Aaliyah's hand, his grip tight with a gratitude that words could never express. They had weathered the storm. The war was over. 1 year later, the sunlight streaming into the warm, open-plan kitchen was different. It wasn't the cold, architectural light of the Gold Coast penthouse, but a soft, golden glow that filtered through the leaves of a large oak tree in a sprawling backyard. Leo and Lily, now energetic 2-year-olds, were seated at a small wooden table, diligently decorating pancakes with more whipped cream than their plates could handle. The past year had been a period of deliberate, joyful reconstruction. The sterile penthouse, a monument to a life that no longer existed, was sold. In its place was this house in a quiet Chicago suburb, a home with scuff marks on the baseboards and a garden that was perpetually in a state of happy chaos. Julian, no longer just a father but a true partner, had championed Aaliyah as she completed her degree, proudly sitting in the front row at her Loyola graduation, watching her accept a diploma that symbolized a future she had built on her own terms. Their relationship had blossomed in the quiet moments, in shared glances over sleeping toddlers, in late-night study sessions at the kitchen table, in the easy comfort of becoming each other's closest confidant. The culmination of that year was happening now in the backyard. Beneath the shade of the old oak tree, an intimate group of friends and family sat on simple white chairs. There was no string quartet, only the sound of a gentle guitar. Julian stood under a simple archway of sunflowers, his face open and filled with an emotion he no longer felt the need to hide. He watched as Leo and Lily, in a charmingly wobbly procession, acted as ring-bearers. Then Aaliyah appeared, walking down the grassy aisle in a simple, elegant dress, her hand tucked into her mother's. Her smile was radiant, her eyes locked on Julian's. Their wedding was the antithesis of the one that had started their journey. It wasn't a performance for a crowd, but a heartfelt promise whispered between two people who had found their home in each other. At the small, joyful reception that followed, a single framed certificate sat on the gift table. It read, "The Vance Reed Foundation." Born from their struggle, it was their shared legacy, a nonprofit dedicated to funding high-quality childcare and providing resources for underserved families across Chicago. They had taken their private pain and transformed it into a public promise. The final shot of the day was of their new, complete family. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the lawn, Julian and Aaliyah sat on a porch swing. He had Lily asleep on his chest, and she had Leo curled into her side, his small hand clutching her finger. They weren't speaking, just quietly existing in the beautiful, ordinary life they had fought so hard to build. This was the real deal, the true success. A family built not on wealth or status but on the unwavering everyday act of showing up with love. They did it. Julian and Aaliyah won. If you're happy that their love and dedication conquered Sabrina's schemes, hit that like button one last time. Let's celebrate a victory for authenticity and true family values.